You open your phone and scroll through social media. A financial guru in a rented mansion tells you that anyone can become a millionaire if they just shift their mindset. Another post shows a 23-year-old bragging about his net worth hitting $2 million thanks to crypto. Then you close the app, look at your bank account, and wonder why you feel so far behind. Here's the thing nobody tells you. Most of what you see about wealth is carefully curated theater. The influencers renting Lamborghinis, the finance bros flexing portfolios they inherited, the get-rich-quick gurus selling you dreams while taking your money. All noise. But behind the noise, there's a real question that most people never answer honestly. What does it actually take to be rich in America in 2025? Not rich according to Instagram, rich according to real data. And more importantly, how far away are you really? And what would it take to close that gap? I've spent years digging into this stuff, researching the actual numbers, the psychology behind money, the behavioral patterns that separate those who build wealth from those who never quite get there. And what I've discovered might surprise you. Being rich isn't some impossible fantasy reserved for trust fund kids and tech founders. But it's also not the overnight success story the internet tries to sell you. The truth is messier, more nuanced, and honestly, more hopeful than you might expect. If you're someone who wants to actually understand where you stand financially and what it would take to move up, stick around. I think this video might change how you see your financial future. And if you find this perspective helpful, consider subscribing. No tricks, no hype. Just real information about money that might actually matter. So let's start with the basics. What does it actually mean to be rich in America right now? According to data from the Federal Reserve and various wealth surveys, here are the actual numbers. To be in the top 10% of net worth in the United States, you need roughly $1.6 million. Not income, net worth. That's everything you own, your home equity, your investment accounts, your cash, minus everything you owe. Your mortgage, your car loans, your credit card debt. 1.6 million gets you into the top 10%. Now here's where it gets interesting. To jump from the top 10% to the top 5%, that threshold climbs significantly. And to be in the top 1%, you're looking at somewhere around $11 to $14 million in net worth, depending on which data source you use. The top 1% isn't just millionaires, it's the multimillionaires. But wait, let's put this in perspective with some additional context. The median net worth for all American households is around $193,000. That's the middle point, meaning half of American households have less than that. Meanwhile, Schwab's Modern Wealth Survey found that the average American thinks you need about $2.5 million to be considered truly wealthy. So there's a gap between perception and reality. What about age? Because comparing your net worth to a 60-year-old's when you're 32 doesn't make much sense. The Federal Reserve data shows that for Americans between 35 and 44, the median net worth is about $135,000. The average is higher, around $550,000, but averages get skewed by the handful of very wealthy people in any group. The median tells you what's typical. So if you're in that age bracket with around $135,000 in net worth, you're basically average. Not ahead, not behind, average. Now I know some of you are thinking, 1.6 million for the top 10%? That seems impossibly far away. But here's the first big mindset shift. Most people confuse income with wealth, and that confusion costs them everything. You can earn $200,000 a year and have almost nothing to show for it if you spend $200,000 a year. I've met doctors with high six-figure incomes who live paycheck to paycheck because they upgraded to the nice house in the nice neighborhood with the nice cars and the nice private schools the moment their income allowed it. They earn like the top 5%, but spend like the top 1% and save like the bottom 50. Meanwhile, I've met school teachers who retired with over $1 million because they lived below their means for 40 years and invested consistently. This is why net worth matters so much more than income. Income is what flows through your hands. Net worth is what sticks. And here's the uncomfortable reality that should motivate you. According to various surveys, somewhere between 24 and 67% of Americans describe themselves as living paycheck to paycheck, depending on how the question is asked. Bank of America's analysis, which looks at actual spending data rather than self-reporting, found that about 24% of households spend more than 95% of their income on necessities alone. For lower income households, that number jumps to nearly 30%. These are people with almost no margin, no breathing room, no ability to capture opportunities when they arise. The point isn't to shame anyone. Inflation has been brutal, Housing costs are genuinely crushing, but it does mean that if you can escape that cycle, if you can create even a small gap between what you earn and what you spend, you're already doing something that a shocking percentage of the country cannot seem to do. So how do you actually get from where you are to that top 10% threshold? Let's talk about the invisible thresholds, because this is where the psychology gets really interesting. Research in behavioral finance consistently shows that humans don't experience financial progress in a linear way. We experience it in levels. There are certain dollar amounts that fundamentally change how you think, feel, and behave around money. The first major threshold is having any emergency savings at all. According to the Federal Reserve's annual survey on household financial well-being, only about 55% of American adults have set aside enough money to cover 3 months of expenses. That means 45% couldn't handle losing their income for even 3 months without serious financial hardship. And other surveys paint an even grimmer picture. One recent report found that nearly 60% of Americans couldn't cover an unexpected $1,000 expense using their savings. Think about what that means psychologically. When you're operating without savings, every unexpected expense becomes a crisis. Your car breaks down? Crisis. Your kid gets sick? Crisis. Hours get cut at work? Crisis. Your brain is constantly in survival mode, flooded with cortisol, making short-term reactive decisions because that's all it can handle. Research on scarcity mindset shows that financial stress literally impairs cognitive function. It's harder to think clearly, plan long-term, or resist impulsive decisions when you're worried about making rent. But something magical happens when you build a small buffer. Even a few $1,000s in savings changes your relationship with money. Studies suggest that having just $2,000 in emergency savings is associated with significantly higher financial well-being scores. It's not because $2,000 solves all problems. It's because it moves you from crisis mode to stability mode. Suddenly, a car repair isn't a disaster. It's an inconvenience. A medical bill isn't a catastrophe. It's an expense. Your brain can finally relax enough to think about the future instead of just surviving the present. The next threshold is somewhere around $10,000 to $25,000. This is where you start to feel what I call financial confidence. You know that even a bad month or two won't destroy you. You can negotiate harder at work because you're not desperate. You can take a calculated risk on a better opportunity. You're not trapped. Then comes the $100,000 milestone. Getting to $100,000 in invested assets is often described as the hardest milestone in wealth building. Why? Because compound growth hasn't really kicked in yet. When you have $10,000 invested and it grows 7%, that's $700. Nice, but not life-changing. When you have $100,000 and it grows 7%, that's $7,000. Now we're talking. Here's a thought experiment that illustrates this. If you invested $500 per month, earning roughly 7% real returns, adjusted for inflation, it would take you about 12 to 14 years to hit 100,000. But getting from 100,000 to 200,000? That only takes about 5 to 6 more years. Because now your money is doing more of the heavy lifting. And getting from 200 to 300,000? Even faster. The math accelerates as you go. This is why the first 100,000 is so important and so difficult. It requires years of discipline before you see dramatic results. But once you cross that threshold, momentum builds. The boulder you've been pushing uphill starts rolling downhill. Now let's talk about something that trips up almost everyone. The big decisions versus the small decisions. You've probably heard financial advice about cutting your daily coffee or skipping the avocado toast. And look, I'm not going to tell you those tiny habits don't matter at all. Every dollar you save is a dollar that can compound. But here's the truth. Obsessing over $5 purchases while ignoring $500 monthly decisions is like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. Let me give you some real numbers. The average monthly car payment for a new vehicle in the United States is now around $749. For a used car, it's around $529. The average loan term has stretched to nearly 69 months for new cars. That means the typical new car buyer is paying almost $9,000 per year, every year, for nearly 6 years, just for the privilege of driving a depreciating asset. Over 5 years, that's roughly $45,000 in car payments alone. And that doesn't include insurance, gas, maintenance, and repairs. Now imagine if instead of buying that $45,000 new car with a $749 monthly payment, you bought a reliable $10,000 used car and invested the $400 difference every month. Over 10 years, at historical stock market average returns of around 10% per year, That monthly investment could grow to over $80,000. That's the real cost of the car decision. Not just what you paid, but what you didn't earn. Housing is even bigger. The general rule is that housing should be around 25 to 30% of your gross income. But in many cities, people are paying 40 or 50%. Every extra 10% of income going to housing is 10% not going to investments, not building your net worth, not compounding toward that 1.6 million threshold. I'm not saying you should live in a terrible apartment or drive a dangerous car. Quality of life matters. But I am saying that if you want to reach top 10% wealth, you need to be intentional about the big recurring expenses. Those are the decisions that actually move the needle, not whether you buy a latte. Here's another thing that changes when you start building wealth: your relationship with work. When you have no savings, you're essentially trapped. You can't quit a toxic job because you need next month's rent. You can't negotiate hard for a raise because you can't afford to be fired. You take whatever is offered because you have no leverage. But when you have even 6 months of expenses saved, everything shifts. This is sometimes called walk-away money. It's not enough to retire, but it's enough to say no. And the ability to say no is one of the most valuable financial assets you can have. You can negotiate from a position of strength. You can hold out for better opportunities. You can invest in yourself, pay for a course, take a lower-paying job with more growth potential, attend the conference that could change your career trajectory. Studies consistently show that people who feel financially secure perform better at work, are more likely to ask for raises, and change jobs more strategically. Financial stability creates a positive feedback loop. Security leads to confidence, leads to better career outcomes, leads to more security. So what actually separates the people who build wealth from those who don't? It's not primarily intelligence or income. It's a handful of behaviors practiced consistently over years. First, they track their net worth. They know exactly what they own and what they owe. Most Americans couldn't tell you their net worth within $10,000. Wealthy people check it regularly. Not obsessively, but consistently. What gets measured gets managed. Second, they automate saving and investing. The decision to save isn't a daily choice. It happens automatically before they see the money. If you have to actively decide to transfer money to savings each paycheck, willpower will eventually fail. If it happens automatically, it just becomes part of life. Third, they keep lifestyle creep under control. This is the silent killer of wealth building. You get a raise and suddenly you deserve a nicer apartment, a better car, fancier vacations. Your income goes up 20%, but so does your spending. Net effect on wealth building? Zero. The people who reach top 10% net worth usually increase their savings rate as their income grew, not their lifestyle. Fourth, they invest consistently in broadly diversified assets over long periods. Nothing fancy. No day trading, no crypto gambling, no hot stock tips from their brother-in-law. Just boring, consistent investing in low-cost index funds that track the broad market. Historical data shows the stock market has returned roughly 10% annually on average over the past century. Some years much more, some years it loses 20 or 30%, but over decades, patient investors have been rewarded. Fifth, and this is crucial, they own appreciating assets. There's a fundamental difference between assets that go up in value over time and things that go down. Your car depreciates. Your investment portfolio appreciates. Your wardrobe depreciates. Your home equity, in most markets over long periods, appreciates. Wealthy people allocate money toward things that grow, not things that shrink. Now let me talk about the mistakes, because even people who know all this stuff still find ways to blow it. The first mistake is treating savings milestones as rewards. You hit $20,000 saved and suddenly decide you deserve that $5,000 vacation you've been putting off. You just gave back 25% of your progress. Those milestones aren't finish lines. They're stepping stones. Celebrate them with a nice dinner, sure, not with purchases that set you back by months. The second mistake is upgrading too fast. The moment income increases, people lock themselves into higher fixed costs. A bigger apartment, a nicer car, private schools for kids. These aren't one-time expenses. They're recurring drains that reset your baseline. Now you need to earn that much just to maintain your lifestyle. You've traded flexibility for luxury. The third mistake is over-leveraging with debt. Debt can be a tool, but it's a dangerous one. A mortgage on a reasonably priced home you'll live in for years? That can make sense. Taking on debt to invest in yourself, like certain educational programs. Potentially reasonable, but debt for consumer purchases, cars you can't afford, furniture, vacations, electronics? That's future you paying for present you's impatience. And future you will not be happy about it. The fourth mistake is trying to time the market or chase hot investments. For every person who made money on a risky bet, there are 10 who lost their shirts but don't talk about it. The data is overwhelming. Even professional investors rarely beat the market consistently over long periods. Your best strategy is usually the boring. Invest consistently, diversify broadly, keep costs low, and wait. So what should you actually do? Let me give you a practical framework. First, calculate your net worth right now. Everything you own minus everything you owe. Write it down. This is your starting point. No judgment, just facts. Second, set milestone targets based on where you want to go. Maybe your first goal is a $2,000 emergency fund, then $10,000, then $50,000, then $100,000. Each milestone represents a psychological and practical shift in your financial life. The top 10% threshold of 1.6 million might seem impossibly far away, but every journey starts with a single step, and every milestone builds on the last. Third, automate your savings and investments. Decide on a percentage of income, even if it's just 5 or 10% to start, and set up automatic transfers. Make it happen before you see the money. Fourth, audit your big fixed costs. Look at housing, transportation, insurance, subscriptions. These are where real savings hide. Could you move somewhere slightly cheaper? Could you drive a less expensive car? Could you cut the subscriptions you don't actually use? I'm not talking about suffering. I'm talking about intentionality. Fifth, focus on increasing your income over time. Savings rate matters, but there's a floor to how much you can cut. There's no ceiling on how much you can earn. Invest in skills, negotiate for raises, consider side income, position yourself for promotions. The combination of higher income and controlled lifestyle creates maximum wealth building acceleration. Sixth, invest consistently in low-cost, broadly diversified funds and don't touch it. Ignore the headlines. Ignore the market corrections. History shows that time in the market beats timing the market almost every time. The historical average return of the S&P 500 is around 10% annually. Some decades are better, some are worse. But patient, consistent investors have been rewarded over the long run. Finally, remember that investing involves risk. Past performance doesn't guarantee future results. Markets can go down and stay down for years. Don't invest money you'll need in the short term, and consider speaking with a qualified financial professional about your specific situation. Here's what I want you to take away from this video. The top 10% isn't some exclusive club reserved for people born into money. The data shows that ordinary people can build extraordinary net worth through decades of consistent, intentional behavior. The gap between median net worth and top 10% net worth is absolutely bridgeable within a working lifetime if you start early enough and stay disciplined. But here's the real point, and this is what I hope you remember. The journey to wealth isn't really about the money. It's about who you become in the process. The person who can delay gratification, who can say no to short-term pleasures for long-term security, who can stay consistent month after month and year after year. That person doesn't just end up with a bigger bank account. They end up with a fundamentally different life. More options, more security, more freedom, more ability to help others and do meaningful things. The thresholds I've talked about, the first $2,000 in emergency savings, the first $100,000 invested, the eventual $1.6 million to reach top 10%, these aren't just numbers. They're markers of personal transformation. Each one requires developing skills and habits that compound just like money does. You have more control over your financial future than you probably realize. It won't happen overnight. There are no shortcuts that aren't also gambles. But the path is there. It's real. And it's walked by thousands of ordinary people every single day. If this video helped you see money differently, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that like button and subscribed. It helps more people find this content. And I'm curious, what's one money decision from your past you'd redo if you could? Or what's the next financial milestone you're working toward? Drop it in the comments. I read them, and I think we can all learn from each other's experiences. Thanks for watching.